If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kat, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at @fitnessmama, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. In today's episode, we will be discussing a topic that is near and dear to every parent's heart: fussy feeding in babies and toddlers. So joining us is a special guest, Kat, who is a registered paediatric dietitian, and she has got so much experience in working with young babies and children and their families. Kat has helped countless parents overcome the challenges of fussy feeding and is here today to share her expertise and provide some practical advice for parents who might be struggling with picky eaters. So whether you're a new parent trying to navigate the world of feeding your little one, or perhaps you're a seasoned pro looking for some new tips and strategies, this episode is for you. Before diving into this episode with Kat, I just want to thank you so much again for supporting this podcast along the way. It's now approaching 3 years old, and we've released over 139 episodes, and this podcast has been listened to around the world. So thank you so much for your support and for sharing this podcast with your pregnant friends, perhaps your new mum friends, and thank you for all the ratings and reviews this podcast has been receiving lately as well. So sharing, rating and reviewing this podcast is probably one of the most important ways to help this podcast grow and reach more people. It is definitely a love project. It's a passion project, I should say. But at the end of the day, if I can just help one more pregnant or postnatal mum have a wonderful motherhood experience, then my job is done. So thank you so much for sharing, rating and reviewing this podcast. It's really appreciated. Right, let's dive into this episode with Kat. Kat, thank you so much for joining me today on the Fitness Mama podcast. We are chatting all things fussy feeding in this stage of baby toddlerhood. And I'm so excited to chat because I think every single parent out there at some stage or other has issues with kids not, it's one of my pet hates, like spending an hour preparing dinner for your kids to turn their nose up at it. So
yeah, you and every other parent, I think. It's really common. 50% of parents report that their child goes through a fussy eating phase at some point. And for most of those kids, they do kind of outgrow it. But I think with the great things that come with social media, on the other side of it, we also have more information at our fingertips than ever. We have more people giving us 30-second snippets of advice of how to deal with fussy eating. And it's kind of created this hyper focus on feeding kids and what makes a good parent in terms of nutrition and nourishing your child. And it's just ups the game in terms of expectations and pressures on parents and kids on what is normal and what we should be doing. And my philosophy is really about how do we make it easier to feed your kids. And I work in a pediatric feeding clinic with some pediatricians, and I see pediatric feeding disorders and eating disorders and like that really extreme end of like restrictive problem feeding, fussy. So it's really nice on my Instagram platform where it's normal everyday kind of fussy eating to really be able to reassure parents that, what you're doing is great and your kid is fine and they'll probably just grow out of it. So I'm kind of on a mission to try and make meal times less stressful for parents.
Amazing. Well, let's start off. That's the perfect place to start then, is what's normal and what's not normal?
Yeah. So there are a few different guides or ideas around this, but I kind of go off, I like a really kind of structured definition that's really clear cut. So, because I think it gives parents peace of mind. So a picky eater is someone who might eat about 30 foods. They might, go off a food, but if you take it out of their diet and reintroduce it in a couple of weeks, they'll usually reaccept it. So, you can get foods back into their diet. They will eat at least one food from all or most food groups. So they're not kind of like, it might all be beige, but they're eating from every food group. You can have a new food on their plate and they're not going to get upset or anything like that. They may not eat it, but they might pick it up. They're selective, but they eat at most meal times if they're hungry. Where a fussy or problem feeder, where you really need that extra support, is kind of that next level. So often, and a lot of parents that I work with who have these types of kids, they're like, yep, that's me, as I go through this kind of checklist where it's like less than 20 foods. They food jag, which means that when they get sick of a food that they really like, you cannot reintroduce it into their diet. So that list of accepted foods is just dwindling and getting smaller and smaller. They refuse entire food groups, so they're at risk of nutritional deficiency. So for these kids, we often see them not getting enough calcium or enough iron, and they often need to have different meals to everyone else in the family. And if you put a food that they aren't comfortable with on a plate, there can be an entire meltdown or tantrum and so much discomfort for them that can completely derail the entire mealtime for everybody. And it tends to persist for a really long time, like not weeks or months, but years. So they're the ones that kind of need that one-on-one specialist intervention from feeding specialists.
Interesting. And so I'm assuming this isn't just a one-off or, every so often having a tantrum because they wanted spaghetti bolognese and not chicken casserole, which happened to us just last week. So it's not
happens. Yeah. And it's kind of knowing, is this about, is this a tired kid who's had a really long day, who wanted a particular food, and it's actually not about the meal? Like often mealtime at the end of a day for a toddler or a small child, they've had big days at school and they've had to hold in all of those feelings and be on their best behavior in the classrooms and follow rules, and they get home and it's a safe place where they can have these big kind of meltdowns and let those feelings out. And the dinner table can be a place that often happens. So is it more about what else is going on, or that child trying to exert their autonomy and control, which is really normal? Or is this more like a recurrent issue where meal times are incredibly anxiety provoking and there's some fear and anxiety around food for your kid? And parents are pretty good at knowing the difference, I think. So every now and then the mealtime tantrums at the end of the day are a very different thing to like problem feeding and extreme picky eating.
I would love to ask, I know we weren't going to be talking about problem feeding per se, but I think it would be good to just quickly touch on, just so that if anyone's listening and trying to differentiate whether or not their child, do they need to seek help, or is this something where you can try a few strategies at home? So when would you encourage someone to seek help for their child's?
Yeah. So if that list kind of I went through before about like the problem feeding, the really extreme fussy eating as opposed to a bit selective or picky, if you're sitting there and going, that is my child, that's when you need to reach out for help. Because a lot of the strategies that you see on Instagram, take the pressure off, food play, light foods, modeling, that stuff doesn't work, or it doesn't necessarily work in the way that's portrayed on social media for every kid. You really need an individualized plan, because we kind of want to know, okay, there's fussy eating, but what is underneath that? What's causing that problem feeding? Is it that the cause is because of like oral motor developmental issues? Is there trauma around food if they had an experience of gagging? Is there discomfort because they're constipated or have food allergy? Is there sensory sensitivity? So we kind of need to understand like what's going on before we can address it and do it appropriately and safely for everyone, each individual family. So look, if any of those things, I'd say get help. But if it's like picky eating and you kind of go, oh, well, they eat more than 20, 30 foods and like they will eat when they're hungry, but they're not gaining weight well, They are missing whole food groups, like they don't need any meat or fortified iron cereals. That's usually a reason to get some support. But the biggest thing is if you're worried about it. If you're stressed and mealtimes feel like a battle or a struggle and you're dreading them, like we need to change that dynamic. We need to change things so that feeding kids is not stressful for you. And often I'll go through your kid's diet and it might all be beige, but I can reassure parents that they're growing well, they're meeting all their nutrition needs, you're doing all of the things that you need to do to encourage a good relationship with food over time. You can just take the pressure off and you can cook food that you want to eat, and you can cater to them, be considerate to their needs without catering and cooking them a separate meal. But we can change the dynamic and take the pressure and stress out of meals for parents pretty quickly in that instance. So I'd say if you're worried, if your kid isn't ticking those like problem feeding boxes, but you find meals exhausting, get some help, because often with one session we can make a really big difference and save your sanity.
Oh, that's great to hear. So can we go into a few of those strategies? And I know that your job is to really individualize this. And as we said before, like if you please do go seek that assessment and that individualized treatment. But could you go through some general strategies that it's just good for all parents to help with?
So for the not problem feeding, the fussy eating, a lot of parents kind of get into this trap of thinking my child has to eat and they need to be eating. And so they start like, if their kid doesn't eat one thing, they change and offer another meal, or they lean really heavily on like food pouches or particular textures, or like letting them run around at meal times because they're just like, my kid has to eat. And we can kind of get into this cycle of doing things to help our kid eat the moment, which actually compound the issue. So there's lots of things if you've just got like a general, developmentally normal fussy eater that we as parents can do to help them and help ourselves through that. So one of the biggest things, it might help if I actually kind of go through like the fussy eating periods and kind of talk about that as well to start with. So, we start solids, and kind of 6 to 12 months, we have this golden period where kids are usually pretty gung-ho and excited. Like you can put liver in front of them and they're just like, oh, cool, I'll give this a go. And don't turn their nose up at it. We've all think back to what our kids ate at 8 months. We're like, oh, wow, remember when you used to eat like broccoli and, slow cooked lamb shanks, and now it's like, well, not about it. So this is that golden period where it's really about offering variety and getting them used to a wide variety of things. And then we kind of hit this period between 12 to 14 months where they develop a real awareness about flavour and perception. At this time, their growth is also slowing. Their nutrition needs are slowing down as well. And so they tend to, become a bit more selective, have less appetite, want to eat less, and they are developing preference in their own voice. So this is kind of that first tricky, fussy eating period that parents can kind of fall into this trap of they have to be eating because you've been told from a very young age, are they having enough milk? How much weight are they gaining? And such a hyper focus on growth that parents carry that through rather than going, well, maybe my child, and this is like 12 to 14 months. First thing I look at is how much milk are they having over the day? If they're not breastfed, if they're drinking milk from a cup or a bottle, or they're formula fed, trying to keep that to like 400 mils after 12 months, because milk can displace appetite and fill them up, their little tummies up quickly. It can also increase risk of anemia as well, because calcium interferes with iron absorption, and being anemic can also cause a loss of appetite as well. So looking at milk, looking at trying to build appetite. Are they coming to the mealtime hungry? So 2 to 3 hours between meals and snacks. Being quite firm at this age around the boundary of we eat in the high chair. If they're not, they're indicating the meal's done, you tell them if you're finished eating, the meal is done, that communicating with them. That's really important at that age. But we also tend to have childcare illnesses and teething. So that disrupts eating as well. So I'd say at this age, and for all ages, but specifically at this age, parents really need to try and let go of some of that control and trust their little one's appetite. Kids are incredibly good at regulating how much they need to be eating to meet their needs. And they're going to have days where they eat everything and then they eat nothing. And that's okay. As long as they're gaining weight and growing well and there's no concerns, we can trust that they're getting what they need. So setting boundaries, not letting them graze, looking at milk and trusting them are kind of the cornerstones at that, 12 to 14 months. We then kind of go through another shift between 18 and 36 months, and you go, oh my God, that's so long. That's like 1.5 to 3 years old. But they're really developing opinion and self-awareness at this age. And we get another real leap of fussiness. And the other two periods are like kind of 5 to 7 and 9 to 11. And then I know it kind of goes on and off forever, doesn't it? I know. But look, when we hit that next fussy period, that's kind of the one where I find that if we don't use these strategies for fussy eating, which are really about trust and autonomy, then we can kind of get into that cycle of fussy eating that's really hard to break. So, look, the biggest thing I would say is the division of responsibility. I'm sure you've probably heard that before or seen that floating around. So that's, that parents are in charge of what is on offer and when, and children decide how much to eat from what is on offer. So that's a really big thing. It's not our job to make our kids eat. We need to trust that they know what their bodies need and that they're getting enough. There's a lot of research to show us that this is true, that kids the appetite, and their appetite is enough to fuel their bodies for most kids. So if they're growing well, we don't need to constantly be offering and pressuring them to eat. When you pressure children to eat, it backfires. They hate pressure. They like control and autonomy. If you're pressuring them, even if you don't think they are, you might be like, your sister's having some broccoli and carrots, do you want to try them? Or, mummy's eating all of hers, or you can have some dessert if you finish your dinner. That's us putting pressure on them. So really taking the pressure off, what they're eating is just to be the least thing that you focus on. Mealtimes are time for connection and chatting and bonding. It's not about, watching or talking about food unless it's child-led. So that's the first thing, the division of responsibility. So making sure that you know what your role is,
And can I interrupt there? Because
always.
I find this, and this is probably something I need to work on, but at times I have found this really challenging because one of my children in particular has always been on the low weight side. Mm-hmm. So, when you're just worried that it's that cycle that you talk about, and it's sometimes when, they haven't eaten much, but you suspect that they'll be hungry, it's very hard as a parent to pull back and just let them have that autonomy. This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months, yes, that's 9 months, they also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply.
Yeah. And often kids will jump around on the centiles, right? So I'd say if they're low on the centile, but they're tracking along their centile, they don't need to be, they're not going to necessarily be where their siblings are or where they were at 6 months or when they were born. That's normal. So as long as they're not continuing to drop, we don't need to use other strategies. And if they were, that's when I'd say you need some one-on-one support, and especially managing the dynamic of multiple children in a household where different kids have different needs. That's something we need to really think about. That's the first. The first thing is that division of responsibility, but people often say to me, but, I offer a meal and they don't want it. We had stir fry and they wouldn't touch it. Then I'd go, well, we need to offer things that are appropriate and that that they're comfortable eating as well. So my second piece of advice, general fussy eating advice, would be including foods that are liked and accepted at every mealtime. So if they are hungry, they're coming to the table with something that they feel comfortable eating. So that might be something like having, peanut butter on toast, or having
spaghetti bolognese 7 days a week.
Yeah. I mean, I would say maybe not 7 days, but try and mix up different type of pasta, so we still want some variety in there. But look, if I'd say offering a safe food, it might be blueberries and yogurt, having a food that is liked and accepted, because sometimes just knowing that they always know they're going to have something that they can eat comfortably at the table is enough to get them there not feeling the pressure. They start eating, it builds their appetite, gets them interested, and then there's no pressure,
So when you suggested blueberries and yogurt, if the child, small child or toddler says, no, I don't want any dinner, even though it's a tried and tested one previously and, it's accepted, as you said, but then straight away they're saying, I want dessert.
Yeah.
What would you...
Yeah, so there's a couple of things, and again, it depends what works for your family. Sometimes offering if dessert is something that you have, say, a couple of nights a week, it's kind of in the schedule for that they get something after dinner, that's fine. Like if they don't want to eat what's on the table, I would say if they then say dessert straight away when everyone's still eating, I'd say, well, no, dessert, we have dessert later altogether. But I would never withhold dessert because they're not eating dinner as well. Like as adults, you think about like that, and sometimes we don't feel like we're not hungry, we don't feel like what's on offer in front of us, but we can eat dessert. We don't want to make dessert conditional on finishing the meal either. So I don't like to use dessert as a reward. Sometimes I say just if dessert's something that you always do on a Friday night, and like that shouldn't be conditional, but sometimes offering dessert with the main meal, I know it sounds so it's counterintuitive because we've been told not to do that in our entire lives. But you'll often find with fussy eaters that if you start offering them like a muffin or a biscuit or yogurt or whatever it is alongside the main meal, they'll start with that, and maybe for the first couple of days or weeks that's what they will finish and that's it. But then it just becomes normal. It takes it off a pedestal, and then it helps to kind of take that pressure off. I have to sit down and eat what's in front of me. I mean, that doesn't work for everybody. Some people are really comfortable doing that, others aren't. But I'd say if dessert is something that you offer as a family, you don't want it to be conditional on finishing dinner.
Some great tips there.
Yeah, but all of these things, when I say, if this is something someone's listening to and has a gut reaction that that's the wrong thing, what I would encourage them to do is think about why it feels wrong. Often it's because of the way that our own relationship with food and the way that we were taught about, sweet foods and healthy foods and stuff like that. It's more about how we feel about food and what we feel our kids should be eating rather than there being an actual issue offering dessert alongside a meal or letting a kid eat dessert if they don't eat dinner. So sometimes we have these like really visceral gut reactions to advice like this. It's more because we've been told certain foods are bad or shouldn't be eaten unless they're a reward or unless we eat our veggies. So
And I know when my mum looks after my children, or like I know she grew up post-war, and so they had a very different relationship with food in terms of you just eat everything that's on your plate, no questions asked. And I think that was am I right in saying that was a very much a mentality of previous generations?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we think about how prevalent disordered eating and eating disorders are in our adult population and how much we all struggle with the idea of, being a particular weight, looking a particular size, eating a particular way. And I'd say that very few adults are intuitive eaters because that ability to really nourish our body with what we need has been lost because it's been overridden by these external and environmental cues around finish everything on your plate. There are starving children in Africa. How many of us grew up hearing that? Or if you don't eat all your veggies, you're not getting dessert. So then we might be full and not really hungry that day, but we really want the dessert because it tastes good, because food isn't just about nutrition. It's about social, being social and also feeling good. Like it's not just about fuel and we really want the ice cream. So then we overeat on the food we didn't feel like eating as a kid because we wanted the ice cream, so then we're not honouring our hunger cues. But then we're being bombarded with these images of what we should be eating, what health is and wellness culture, and that's really distorted our relationship with food. So a lot of parents are really trying to break that cycle, and it requires a lot of work on our own relationship and feelings around food, but we don't want that for our kids. So it's really challenging ideas.
So in your household, you don't have come on 4 more bites and then you can have dessert.
Never. I've often served a muffin or something alongside the main meal, and he because we've done it from such a young age, he's not that interested in it, and he kind of, some days he prefers savory, some days he prefers sweet, but we don't make any comments, and again, there's no perfect way to feed your kid. It's about, you've got to do what feels right for you, because that's all you can really do at the end of the day. You take the advice and the information on, you do what works for you, and if it's not right, you pivot and adjust. But I don't want anyone to think I'm dictating that, you have to feed your kids a particular way either.
Yeah, amazing. So we've covered right from 6 months to 2 years in terms of fussy feeding and picky eaters. So that's great. Are there any final pieces of advice for mums who might be listening who are having issues in this area?
The biggest piece of advice that, other than taking the pressure off and being self-compassionate and knowing that there's nothing that you've done to cause fussy eating, it's developmentally normal, because there's so much pressure on parents and mums in particular to be like doing everything right. You're doing a great job. But I would say the biggest tool in our toolkit as parents that we have is family meals, modeling eating and variety without saying anything. That's the thing that we're modeling the foods that we want our kids to eat and to enjoy without any pressure, without any expectation. That's the biggest thing we can do, and it's such an easy thing. You don't need to do it every day. The evidence says that as little as 3 family meals a week, and that doesn't have to be dinner, can really have a huge positive impact on not just fussy eating, but like, their learning outcomes in the future and, academics and all these other things. So that social aspect is really overlooked. So I'd say, look, reach out and get some support if you need it, if you're feeling stressed. But the main thing is sitting down and modeling the behavior and the types of food and food variety that you would like your kids to eat.
Amazing. Kat, how can people find you if they want to learn more about you and what you do and your new podcast? Am I allowed to say that? That's going to be released?
Yes. So, it's in the works. It's a slow progress. It's a little passion project. So it's a Bub Grub podcast. We've got a little Instagram page. But, you're welcome to come follow me over at Nourish to Nurture Nutrition on Instagram. I put up lots of recipes. I work with a lot of allergy families as well. So all my recipes are usually top 9 allergy friendly, lots of little bits of advice, but also I do one-on-one consults, mainly via telehealth, which is really helpful because you can do it from the comfort of your own home. So that's nourish to nurture nutrition.com.au, I believe. Gosh, I should know that off by heart.
I'll have the links in the show notes. It's okay.
Great. I don't go to it enough myself, so I'm always having to double check. But look, Instagram's probably the best place if you want some support and tips and advice.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me. Fantastic discussion, and I think no matter how old your children are, I'm sure everyone got something from it. So thank you, Kat.
Thanks for having me.
That's it, ladies. Before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links, including how to connect with Rosie at fitnessmama.com/podcast. And don't forget, if you have been enjoying this podcast, it would mean so much if you could do a rating and a review, or perhaps share the podcast with another friend to really just help this podcast along the way and help it grow that little bit more. So thank you so much. Have a fantastic day, everyone, and I look forward to you joining me next week for another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer: materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I'll see you soon.